Okay, so we're just waiting a couple more minutes to let other people come in, and then we'll get started. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Okay, is that okay with everybody? Good, okay. All right, so welcome everybody to Heritage Tourism Can Help You Grow Your Local Economy. So with us today, our panelists are, first we have Billy Keyserling, who is the former mayor of Beaufort and founder of the nonprofit Second Founding of America. Then we have Frank Knapp, president and CEO of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber. And last but not least, we have Scott Teodorski, Superintendent of Reconstruction Era National Historical Park. So today we're just going to talk about how heritage tourism can help local economies in your area. Frank, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Madison. I'm Frank Knapp, President and CEO of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to all of you who joined us for this Economic Development Forum. Okay, that sounds pretty dry. So let me try again here. Let's talk about tourism. Tourism is a small business industry. Sure, there are some big corporate hotels and chain restaurants, but what tourists really want is the authentic experience that only local small businesses can offer. The local culture, food, arts, unique sites, the things that make local communities special and build sustainable economies. So growing our tourism is good for small business. In this forum, we are going to talk about the economic benefits of a type of tourism that has been largely neglected in our state, heritage tourism. But that is about to change, and you and your local communities can be a part of this new tourism economy. We're going to hear from the man largely responsible for the new Reconstruction Era National Historic Park in Beaufort, South Carolina, and what it will mean to his city and communities across our state and beyond. But first, how big is heritage tourism in the country, and why is it important? Scott Teodorski has been with the National Park Service for 32 years. He has worked in Kentucky, Nevada, Georgia, in Columbia, South Carolina, and now in Beaufort, South Carolina, as the superintendent of the Reconstruction Era National Historic Park. Welcome, Scott.
All right, thank you, Frank. And I just want to take a minute to thank everyone for participating. It's I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the relationship that national parks have with the communities that they're in. National parks sometimes seem like islands, but they're not. They're part of the communities they're in, and I'm really glad to talk about those relationships and how national parks contribute to heritage tourism. We're going to be talking a lot about heritage tourism, and there's a lot of definitions, but what is heritage tourism? Frank alluded to it earlier. There's a word that's important. It's authentic. There's a heritage tourism kind of goes to the heart of the idea that folks they want to connect to things that to their sense of place or their history or their culture. And national parks, at national parks, we strive to do that. Let me give you an example. I mean, you can read about Gettysburg, but when you visit the place where it happened, it's a deeper connection. It's a connection that you don't soon forget. I mean, anybody that's ever been to the Grand Canyon can attest. There's no photo out there that can do it justice. And here at Reconstruction Era, the same thing. When you can stand on the shoreline where folks that were enslaved, got off a boat in 1863 to go hear the Emancipation Proclamation that gave them their freedom. And those are the experiences that national parks provide and that heritage tourism provides. So I'm gonna go through just a few quick graphics here. This first graphic actually shows it's a park map. There's National Park Service sites all over the country, and there's actually right now we're up to 423, and they're not just in our contiguous states. They're also in our territories. They range from Alaska up north, down south to Everglades and the southeast Virgin Islands, and all the way out west. You go all the way to Guam. 423 National Park Service areas that are part of this system that makes up our national park system. And as we zoom in, this next slide, you'll see some of these national park sites that look a little more familiar to you. And these are the sites like Grand Canyon and Great Smoky Mountains National Park and some of these other sites. Again, these are sites that range from phenomenal natural resources to places where you can really stand in the spot where some of our history took place. And then here in South Carolina, that kind of the final map in that series of maps, most folks don't realize that we actually have several. We actually have 7 National Park Service sites here in South Carolina. And in the upstate, we have several sites that are up in what we call the upstate, Cowpens National Battlefield, 96, and Kings Mountain that focus on the Revolutionary War. Most people have no idea that South Carolina played such a role during the war. In the middle of the state, we have Congaree National Park, which is where I worked before I came here, and it preserves one of the most extensive old growth forests in the east. There are trees there that are over 2,000 years old. And then, of course, here in the Low Country, we have Fort Sumter. But what a lot of people don't know is there's a couple other parks near Charleston that are managed as part of that group. Charles Pinckney National Historic Site and Fort Moultrie is part of that as well. And then, of course, Reconstruction Era. And so it's very exciting to be here, to be at a new park, and to be telling stories of probably one of the most misunderstood parts of our history. Talk a little bit about what national parks mean. And this next slide, I've got a map here I'd like to show you that kind of illustrates what visitors do. Every year we dig deep, and every spring there's an announcement that comes out that talks about the economic impacts of national parks. Now, today we're going to talk about 2019 numbers because 2020 was kind of a lost year with COVID. But going back to 2019, you can see in this map, there's kind of some trends. These are the top 15 states, or some of the top states where visitors are spending money. And you see some really striking things right off the bat. You see that some of those Western states, there's segments of economy like in Alaska that are built completely around heritage tourism. If you look at the Four Corners area, Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico, you see what's called the Grand Circle area. You can fly into Las Vegas, for example, and people sometimes will spend weeks in that region exploring the different parks, the historic sites, and of course, along the way, all the towns that are associated. And if you go to the east, you'll see that there's a really prominent dark area, North Carolina and Virginia. that's where some of the most visited national park sites are in the system. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee and North Carolina. And of course, the Blue Ridge Parkway. I don't know if sometimes we don't think of the Blue Ridge Parkway, but it's part of our national park system. And it varies from year to year, but usually it's just about the most visited National Park Service site in the system. So parks are part of the communities, and when people go visit their parks, they're not just getting off the interstate and getting gas and getting right back on. They're usually staying for a while. So heritage tourism is something that we know a little bit about because people come to visit the parks. They usually see multiple parks and they usually stay a while. So the next slide is going to show you a little bit about some of the specific economic spending that happens. We often hear about heads and beds and hotels, but heritage tourism benefits in the national parks. We've learned that it really affects almost every segment of the economy that you can imagine. This graphic shows here in 2019, we had across the country, we had 328 million visitors, and they spent $21 billion. And again, they came and they stayed in hotels and they ate in restaurants, but they also got gas in their cars and they shopped in the retail places and they spent money, and that translates to jobs. I mean, you take these national parks out of these economies and it can really affect things. So now drilling down to South Carolina, the next slide kind of shows you what we've got going on here in South Carolina. In South Carolina, we actually had 2019, we had about 1.6 million visitors to National Park Service sites in South Carolina. And those folks spent almost $94 million. And again, this is money that's spread out across the different sectors of the economy. So sometimes as a park ranger and as a park superintendent, we get wrapped up in the stories at our parks, but we never forget that we're part of that community. And I do want to show you something. This is kind of interesting. We have, if this last slide I want to show you is that there's a trend, and that trend is that this is not going away anytime soon. Visitation to the national parks is going up, and visitor spending in National Park Service sites is going up. And here in South Carolina, in the last 10 or 15 years, those numbers have gradually been going up. So yeah, the national parks are part of the economy. They benefit the communities that they're in. But I want to pause there for a minute because I never forget that the communities that are in and around national parks also support the national parks. Many national parks wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the support of the communities that they're in. In the case of this park was created. It's here because of the efforts of a lot of people that really believe strongly in the heritage and the culture and the stories that are here. And so with that, again, I want to thank everyone for joining, and just remember these national parks are ours. And I'm going to pause and turn it over to former Mayor Billy to talk a little bit about the community role in creating this national park site here in this part of South Carolina. And by the way, we're not even in those economic numbers yet. As a new park, we look forward to contributing to the numbers going forward. So with that said, former Mayor Billy, I will turn it over to you. And thanks again.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Frank, and Madison and Abigail, who are our technicians. Without them, the three of us would probably be just speaking to each other. I want to welcome everybody. Welcome to Beaufort. Welcome to South Carolina. This park is really transformational in many, many ways. The effort to create this park started 21 years ago in 2000. And the attempt to do it was when former Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, said, I'm in charge of the parks, and the parks are supposed to tell the American story. But there's a big gap in here. We have Civil War, we have American Revolution, we have nature, we have all sorts of stories that these hundreds of parks tell, but no one's ever mentioned the Reconstruction era. Well, that's not surprising because that's something most of us weren't taught in school. It's been sort of hidden. And they failed. Congress, they tried to put it through Congress, and it made it through the Senate, but not the House. And it took 16 years, but at which time Babbitt and Congressman Clyburn stepped back in and they said, let's try another way. Let's see if we can get a community organized to come to Washington and explain to the administration, to the National Park Service, Department of Interior, Council on Environmental Quality, and the whole chain up right to President Obama. Let's let the community get organized. And so the community did. And we did in about 6 months, we were able to accomplish this. We did it because the process used rather than the Congress was called the Antiquities Act, created in 1906 under President Theodore Roosevelt. And it allowed a president to create by proclamation a national historic site. But one of the criteria was that the government couldn't spend any money for it or actively solicit it. It had to be community driven. And so between those who started earlier, Babbitt, Clyburn, every major historian in the country basically went to work on trying to convince the National Park Service. Penn Center donated Darrah Hall, the longest standing building on the site. The firehouse was donated as a welcome center downtown. The town of Port Royal, in which Camp Saxton sits, was cooperating, and they have subsequently built a visitor center that they partnered with the National Park Service to get back to Camp Saxton. We could talk about all the sites, but we'll do that in the Q&A if people have questions of Scott. And then Brick Baptist Church on St. Helena Island, where many don't know it, but it was the home to Penn School before Penn School was ever actually even built. But so it's transformational in the sense that it really was driven by a community that said, we want to know the truth, we want to know our history, and we believe that our history should be told like everybody else's. It's transformational also in that it is so relative to the world we live in today, the Reconstruction story. How many times have we all heard Reconstruction in the last couple of months, last year? How much have we heard about the filibuster? How much have we heard about gerrymandering? How much have we heard about the 14th Amendment? Those are all things that came out of Reconstruction. Those are things we really weren't taught about in our school. And you can't really point fingers because it's been 3 generations, if not 4. And it's just become a way of life for us. So we sort of assume things to be the way they are. But if we go back into Reconstruction, we can learn how things became what they are. And I think in that history, we can find solutions, particularly for the next generation, to find solutions on how we really do finally realize citizenship. The 13th and 14th Amendment, 13 was freedom, 14 was citizenship, 15 was the right to vote. And I have to say, except for women, and that's a big exception since women are a majority. But that came along later. And many of the advocates and activists, some of the first suffrage lawyers were 2 African-American men who represented Beaufort County in the state legislature. They were advocating for women's suffrage back in the 1800s. So it's transformational in that it's community driven. It's transformational in that it's a piece of history that is so relevant today. And it's also transformational in that under Scott's leadership, there's a companion to the Reconstruction Era National Historical Park, and that's the network. And that's for those of you who don't live in Beaufort and those who do live in Beaufort. You have to realize that there's so many stories, there's so many places that are eligible under circumstances to be part of a network. So the reality, Scott doesn't want responsibility for managing this, he won't, but there's not a county of the 46 counties in South Carolina, I'll guarantee you, that doesn't have a story about Reconstruction. So ultimately, when we look at that number and we see California up here, or we look at $94 million, not even counting this park, we should be getting up there with California because our whole state is in effect. We have the potential. Those of us in government, those of you in government, I used to be in government, those who are in business, not only with Reconstruction, we're learning some of the traditions, we're learning some of the culture, we're learning some of the African contributions that they made. Many people don't know there were 2,000 African Americans who served in public office during Reconstruction. 6 traditionally Black colleges and universities were started, many in South Carolina. 90 independent schools were started. People who went literally from the fields where they had been enslaved to becoming very wealthy because of what they knew to apply, what they knew as Africans to the terrain here. I mean, self-sufficiency became very obvious to people who were essentially turned out on the street or abandoned in Beaufort because they were freed prior to the emancipation. So it's very, very exciting. I believe that our whole state can be a park and that we're in this together, just like the people in Beaufort came together. I'm hoping the people throughout South Carolina, Frank, the businesses, the cultural community, the heritage community, because every time someone is between the site and the park, they're passing another cultural asset of our community. They're not only just passing, the businesses are buying gas, staying in hotels, buying gifts, eating food. They're seeing other parts of what our state has to offer. So this should support the Friends of Fort Fremont. This should support Mitchellville, which is actually a network site already. And at some point, and hopefully in my lifetime, this is not something we're going to see Scott yawn on this one too. But at some point in our lifetime, we're going to see that arrow, Reconstructional, national, something or another, all over the state of South Carolina. And instead of $94 million, we're going to be looking at $500 million. And that's not only for the businesses that exist, but with the focus on the culture and the resurrection of the Gullah culture and the Africanisms that all of a sudden begin to make sense to us. I think it gives great room for cottage industries and is going to put a spotlight on so much that is special about South Carolina. So I'm very proud of what we did in Beaufort. We wouldn't have done it without people from all over the country. 167 historians from over the country wrote letters to the Secretary of the Interior. 500, 600, 700 people wrote. People signed petitions. I forgot how many tens of thousands of people signed petitions. But this is ours. It's South Carolina's. It's not just Beaufort. Beaufort was selected primarily because Reconstruction actually started here before anywhere else. There's a book about it called Rehearsal for Reconstruction, the Port Royal Experiment, because after the Battle of Port Royal Sound in 1861, the planters abandoned the enslaved people, those who wouldn't go with them, and that was the majority, who were left here on their own and to begin to use their ingenuity, their energy to sustain their families, to start all these things, the institutions, to run for public office. And believe it or not, Reconstruction, though officially ended with the withdrawal of the troops in 1877, the reality is Beaufort County Reconstruction lasted probably until about 1889 or 1890. And a lot of that was because Beaufort was prospering. If you talk to historian, our renowned historian in Beaufort, Dr. Rowland, Larry Rowland, he will tell you that during the Reconstruction era, during that window of 1861 to 1889, Beaufort was the most financially prosperous we've ever been. And Robert Smalls, who was the sort of the ringleader, the community leader, went to the Black businessmen, he went to the white businessmen, he said, it ain't perfect. We're not there yet. Everybody doesn't accept us. But the bottom line, guys, if we work together, we're all going to rise with the sea. We're going to rise with the rising sea. And he was able to sustain it throughout almost the rest of his life. So I think we're lucky. I think we're really lucky to have Scott who is a seasoned superintendent who's got a lot of vision for what can happen. He's building a staff. He's got rangers in the fields, and because of COVID, they've not been open, but they've been outside of the Welcome Center. They've been doing walking tours on Saturdays at noon, I believe it is. You can go to Camp Saxton and see where the first colored troops were trained, where people who were enslaved escaped from Florida and Georgia and came here to join the Union Army, where the contraband, the people who didn't know really what they were because they weren't freed, but their masters had left, they joined and they formed it. And in a way, Camp Saxton was like a little Paris Island, where the first black soldiers were trained. So, but they came from all over the state. One who was in Beaufort who escaped, and I'll get off my rant. Actually, after he left Beaufort, he was in the legislature, and he ended up in Aiken, South Carolina, and he actually founded Aiken, the county of Aiken, South Carolina. But none of this has been told. So this park, under Scott's leadership, with the business community behind it, with the cultural community, the faith-based community, the education community behind it, is really this incredible asset that if we work together and we harvest the benefits of it. And the good news is we're going to be the leader of education. We're going to be the leader of understanding the forgotten, the unfulfilled promises of freedom and justice, equity and opportunity that have sort of come and gone throughout our 250-year history. So I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not very excited about this. I don't have much time invested in this, but I love everybody who's been involved. And this is an invitation to those of you from the business community to join us, support us, because I can assure you that those who come to the park and the Park Service itself as a member of the community are going to be supporting you. And we can grow together around our own special history. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. It's a remarkable, basically untold story that Beaufort will be in the leadership role of educating Americans and foreigners also who want to come and explore this history. Your research on this, where do you feel you're going to be pulling the tourists to come to Beaufort? How far away are they going to come?
Well, I'd be happy if they just started in Beaufort. Beaufort's funny, but the people in Jasper County were part of the Beaufort district then. I think they're going to be coming from far and wide. I think Scott could answer it because he sees people already dribbling in who don't really know about it because it's not on the quote map yet. It's on the website. It's officially a park, but it hasn't grown to the point, and he hasn't been able to operate due to COVID in the way that he will be. But I think you'll be finding people from all over the world coming here, Frank.
Scott, so what's your experience that you have had in other startup heritage parks? How does the word get out so others other than people who live in Beaufort already will be coming there?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's, it's exciting because national parks are bipartisan. You're not going to find people that are going to say they don't like their national parks. And for those of you that are on the are joining us today, there's probably some of you that have the national park passport books. I don't have mine handy to show you, but people will literally drive 50 miles out of their way just to get their stamp for their passport book, because this is part of that National Park Service collective that tells the story of our country. So we kind of look at it a couple different ways. I mean, we have kind of a catchment area. A lot of our visitors that come through the area already come from Florida and Georgia, North Carolina and South Carolina. But like Billy said, with national parks, that opens it up, and we do get people that literally come from all over the country. And you alluded to it as well. We've had a number of foreign visitors in here too. So we're working on our master sign plan now, which is very exciting because after we get that plan, we'll have the brown National Park Service signs out on I-95 and throughout the region. And that's going to even bring more folks in. And it's not just bringing people in just in terms of traffic. These are the kind of folks that like to stay a while, and they like to dig in, and they like to see all the stuff that's here. So working with the community, and that's a priority for us. We want to make sure that people have that opportunity to connect to all these stories while they're here. So yeah, we get folks from all over the place. It's all over the map, literally.
And Billy, you were talking about how we probably have a Reconstruction era historic site in every one of the South Carolina's 46 counties. But we already have 18 designated sites in South Carolina, and they are literally all around the state. So the view here is that somebody who may be coming specifically for the Reconstruction Era National Park in Beaufort actually has a lot of places to stop along the way, right?
You might, that family, they get to Beaufort and they look at the site, they're going to go to Mitchellville over in Hilton Head, the first self-governed community that we know of formerly free African Americans, built hand in hand with the Union forces. Scott was telling me that someone has brought in a house in Orangeburg that's part of the network. Mm-hmm. So they can run up to Orangeburg. If they're in Orangeburg, they're going to see the colleges, and that's going to take them to Columbia. Or I forgot, going through Charleston where you have the other parks, but you're also going to have some specific to Reconstruction sites there, and even over into Georgia. So Scott would have to explain, because you just can't say I'm part of the network. There's certain obligations and responsibilities for a community if they want to be part of the network. But I hope that if there's anyone here from some of these smaller communities that say this doesn't have anything to do with us, I'm going to urge them to dig in and find out what the story is in their community. What happened during this period? Who was elected to office? Who served in the Union Army? who started a school? Who went to a school? How many people in our community had been enslaved? Where did they come from? Where did they go? So, and that's why I say easily in the 46 counties, that there's got to be a site. And it could be a site where something unpleasant happened as well as something. I'm talking about the good. You got to look at the good, bad, and the ugly when you're going to understand history. And some people have said that we're trying to rewrite history. We're not trying to rewrite history, but I think we recognize that in our history books, they're blank pages that fit between the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution. And so we're filling in the history. As I've told some of the people who say, well, I'm a sons of Confederate veterans, I said, good for you. I'm sure you're proud of your family, just as the sons of the colored veterans are proud of their families. The bottom line is we're Americans, and we're together today. And we ought to be having these conversations, and we ought to be understanding and appreciating. And we're not going to erase anybody's history. It gets written on a blackboard. All we're doing is adding stories to the bigger American history. Again, there's been a misunderstanding, and that's why they ran into trouble politically in 2000. But I think it's becoming more and more clear to people that there's, history is what? His story. And I can listen to his story and his story and his story. And then it's my job as an individual, as a citizen, to try to put those pieces together so that I understand the story of my country. And that missing piece is finally going to be filled in with the parks and what happens around it. Because if you have a site in your community, you could create a whole community education program around it, where they start by looking at that particular house in Orangeburg. What's its history? The school children can go out and look at it. They can interview the family. They can look into the genealogy, and it's going to take them, I promise you, to other places, to other states that are tied into this history. So we've really got this huge opportunity to really explore something that is so fundamental, because I think that Dr. Foner wrote a book, which is what we took the name for our organization for, with his permission, Second Founding of America, because it was a second wave that built on the Declaration of Independence, on the Constitution. It filled in the Constitution, as have the other amendments, from women's right to vote to 18-year-olds' right to vote, and many other things.
So before we try to get people to want to explore their communities to see what tie they have to Reconstruction era, we want to motivate them. And as a small business organization, one of those motivations, of course, is economic development. So of our existing sites that we already have identified and been certified as Reconstruction era sites, how do we help those sites then develop this whole theme around so they can maximize the economic growth around this issue?
Yeah,
Scott?
I think the two, well, let me say, but I think the two ways, and I think we start with Scott, because there is a process of applying and getting certified. And then I'll talk more about what the community can do.
So Scott, what can these communities do that we already have 18 sites designated in South Carolina? What could they be doing now that we have an established historic park in Beaufort? What could they be doing now to sort of tie into this whole process?
You bet. And thanks for that. Yeah. And so the Reconstruction Era National Historic Network was created last year as part of legislation that was signed into law. And so within that year, we're now up to 74 sites that are all over the country that are, there was a recognition that as an agency, Reconstruction is a national story. There's a recognition that it's just not feasible to say, okay, we're going to make all these sites a part of this national park. But similar to the African American Civil Rights Network, there was this effort to try to include sites from literally all over the country that connect, and if they meet certain criteria, which folks can find if they go on the website. And our goal when a site applies is not to just look at it and say yes or no. We work with the sites. Besides just working with them to include them in the network if they meet the criteria, we also work with them to connect them to some of the educational institutions that might be in their region so that they can learn more. Or we work with them and sometimes engage on their behalf the State Historic Preservation Office or other agencies like the South Carolina State Parks system. So we work, this network is more than just a collection of sites to us. Our goal is to make it very robust and to make it collective. And as we grow, we want to host educational symposiums and there's a lot of sites that want to know, hey, I've got this historic structure, how can I preserve it or whatever. So, and a lot of these folks are tied into their historical societies where they are in their community. And that's kind of where it starts. And we basically say, hey, we're the National Park Service. We can tell you a little bit about how we've done it at some of our sites, and we're happy to help any way we can. And I think the big thing is we really work hard to make sure that folks feel connected as part of this group, but we also do whatever we can to connect those folks in those communities to resources that can help them grow and help them expand and help them showcase what their site is about. Some of the sites are private residences, for example, where people can walk and see it, but people ask, well, do I have to have a visitor center and do I have to be open? No, it's part of recognizing that these are all different pieces of this big story. And so we're very excited, and the network is actually just over a year old, and we look forward to including more sites, not just in South Carolina, but across the country. And we usually announce sites quarterly, 3 or 4 times a year. And we encourage people to check the website out, and if they know of a site, pass the word. And even if they're not part of the network, we sit at a lot of tables because for us to be part of this community telling these stories, it's just a good opportunity.
And Billy, the network sounds great. But we would encourage local officials to not be passive members of the network, but to work it so that they can grow some sustainable economy around it. Correct?
Exactly. And if I was the mayor or the head of the Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Chamber of Commerce in particular, because y'all hustle and you're in some of the small communities doing some innovative stuff. When you see there's a site, help the people organize it and make sure that it becomes part of your marketing, because that national park arrow or that designation, whatever the designation signage will be for the network sites, the brand for the network sites, let me say, is going to be something that people are going to be familiar with. That's going to. So help them market it, develop it, and market it. I mean, in Beaufort, we had, people gave over. Well, we invested close to $2 million because of the way the park had to come together, and it wasn't public money; it was all private money, with the help of a foundation that felt that this was very important. But if I owned if I was a hotelier, or even if I owned a fly fishing shop on a lake in South Carolina, and I thought that with my Visitors and Convention Bureau or my Tourism Bureau or my Chamber of Commerce, that I could add something as part of being something national, I think that would help boost my marketing significantly. And the pennies they spend or the dollars they spend will magnify themselves exponentially. And so that's why we're doing this show, because we do see a partnership, just like we have partnerships with schools. And that's one of the things our organization is doing, is building partnerships with schools and teachers. Businesses can be partners, should be partners, because this is part of their community. We have 100 identifiable sites just in Beaufort County. Now, they're not all places that would even be a network site. In private residence, it's down a dirt road. It's not it's not accessible. People don't want the notoriety. But there are plenty of places in downtown every city in South Carolina. I will guarantee you there is something relative to the story of Reconstruction from the end of the Civil War up for the next 15, if not 20 years or more. And so as a businessman, it's a business person, it's in my interest to help find and develop this cultural asset, this historical asset, because it's part of what I'm marketing. It's part of what sells my community. It's part of what makes my community grow. And it educates my children.
So Scott, you had indicated that there are universities who might be able to help a community identify some sites in their community, and you even mentioned that some are looking for help in preservation of buildings. So, is there any type of funds available to help a local community uncover what they have and probably needing to fix up some things they have so that tourists can actually come see it?
Certainly, yeah. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to our coordinator in Washington. The National Park Service there's a number of funds that the historic sites can apply to, whether they're part of the network or not. And so, but a lot of these network sites, we're going to actually have she's going to join one of our calls with all the network sites at some point to talk about the opportunities there. A number of the HBCUs in South Carolina are part of the network, and they're very interested in working collaboratively with us to make sure that folks understand, what kind of opportunities there are out there. There are colleges in South Carolina. There are some incredible preservation programs, for example, that are managed through the College of Charleston and Clemson. So one of the things that we look forward to doing is and are happy to do is because we work with these folks on a lot of projects. I mean, these folks help national parks. They come to the parks, and college students come to the parks and learn and work. And it's our hope that we can share this information And this network, in addition to being just a collection of sites that as a visitor you can go visit, as a network, we want to make sure that we open this communication so that folks can have all those resources to rely on. So yeah, there's if folks want to reach out, and then they're actually, if you look on the nps.gov, the National Park Service website, or if you just Google, there are grant opportunities if you're doing historic preservation. And there's also opportunities related to the state, even though we can't apply for them as a national park. That grant funding is for just like what you're talking about, for folks out in the communities and sites throughout the states.
So on the screen we have a URL for the National Park Service. So hopefully people can go there. Can they simply reach out to you, Scott, down in Beaufort?
You sure can. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm always happy to talk to folks. In fact, recently I had a group in Tennessee that was working on some kind of project that was similar in scope. And when I got off the phone, they said that, there's some sites here that might be good network sites. So all these connections that we make are just, it's folks recognize that, we've got these stories to tell. And, if you put just a little bit of work into highlighting those places, people will come visit them, and people take care of things that they love, and in the National Park Service, that's our biggest tool we have in the toolbox. When people love these stories, they take care of these places and they perpetuate these stories, and they make sure that they're not forgotten. And that's kind of our overall goal. But yeah, I'd be happy to if folks wanted to reach out directly to me, that'd be great.
Well, very good. And we had on the screen also your email address, Scott. And so if you missed that and don't want to rewind this show, you can go to the Reconstruction Era National Historic Park. Just go on the internet and find that, and you can find a way to contact their office and ask for Scott Teodorski for help. And Billy, can somebody call you with the second founding of America?
Anytime they want. Madison, you want to put my contact up? It's interesting. This goes beyond us, but it shows the potential for this network. And that is, maybe 3 months ago, the Conservation Lands Foundation, which is the group I mentioned, the nonprofit who helped us get going, called and asked us if we would talk to a gentleman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood section, which of course is where Black Wall Street was and was destroyed. And they have the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Center that's up and running and doing well and partnering with the city and has programs and working with schools, but they really wanted to be part. They wanted to talk, so we got them on the telephone with Scott, and he explained what you do, and hopefully, something will develop on that. A group in Fayetteville was having trouble, and they called Michael Allen, who worked for the Park Service during the process of establishing the park. In Fayetteville, North Carolina, they called and said, can you help us? We're having trouble explaining to our community how this is going to hurt no one and help everybody. So, and that's our role as what will officially become, when we get the contract signed, a philanthropic friend of the Park Service. We created, along the way, between 2000 and when we went into gear in 2016, I think it was 12, 14, we applied for a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to do a Teachers Institute. And that Teachers Institute is the USCB, University of South Carolina, Beaufort, partnered with the National Endowment for the Humanities, and they now run, and this will be the fourth year where they are actually running. They bring in teachers, they bring in scholars, and they teach the teachers about Reconstruction, because many of them hadn't been taught that. We also work with Facing History and Ourselves which has another form of teaching where they talk more about the pedagogy of experiential learning. And last year and this summer it's a multi-day event. Last year, I guess it was 2 days, but Scott's chief of interpretation or director of interpretation, who is an incredible historian, former school teacher, if I'm not mistaken. I think a lot of his rangers are school teachers who wanted to go deeper and get into the woods, so to speak, but did a fabulous we filmed 3 different videos of sites so that someone who lived in Nebraska who wanted to teach Reconstruction could actually walk around with Chris around several of the sites here in Beaufort. And then there was talk later on about how you leverage these sites into the education of the community and the children. So there's just this is the time. The timing couldn't be better. The country is struggling. We all know that. And set aside, just remember that while President Obama proclaimed the Reconstruction Era National Monument, which was the precursor to becoming a national park, President Trump signed the legislation that transitioned it into a national park and network. So, as Scott said, it's not a partisan effort. It's an information gathering process. It's educating ourselves, because during this period, so much happened that affects our everyday lives today, our democratic system. I'm just amazed every time I turn on the news. There's something where if you don't understand what they're talking about, if you go back and look at Reconstruction, you can see how it happened.
Well, Billy, thank you so much. Scott, thank you for this very good hour. And thank you to our ladies, Abigail and Madison, for coordinating all this. And again, if you want to find out more, contact Scott at the Reconstruction Era National Historic Park, or Mr. Billy Keyserling at the Second Founding of America. And they will be more than happy to help you in your community develop some type of site there tied to Reconstruction Era, and that will help your local economy. It's good all around, so I encourage you to do it. I'm Frank Knapp, President CEO of the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you all very much. We're not recording. No, we are recording.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to end it.
Now.